In 1935, Heinrich Himmler dispatched a secret SS expedition to Tibet searching for the origins of the Aryan race, not as a scientific mission, but as a religious pilgrimage. That's real documented history, and it's one piece of evidence that World War II wasn't just a political war or even a racial war. It was a religious war disguised as ideology. The Holocaust was more than just genocide. To the Nazi leadership, it was religious ritual. The SS weren't just soldiers, they were warrior priests. And the invasions weren't just conquest, they were crusades to reclaim sacred land, and I'll prove it. Welcome to Arnie's Brain Train. I'm Alex Arnold, and before we get going, I'll answer a couple questions first. Alex, why are you using AI images? Well, because I like not getting copyright strikes and I'm not paying for Hitler pictures. Or, I disagree with your interpretation of ... No problem. Every single source I'm using today is linked in the pinned comment and in the description below. 4 academic historians and dozens of primary sources. Go wild, fact check me. That's literally why I put them there. Now, you know how we do things on this channel: facts over feelings, evidence over emotions, and sometimes AI generated images, because copyright law is a nightmare and I've got bills to pay. All the sources are listed below. Let's go. Let's start with the proof, the first piece of evidence, where this all began. Vienna, 1908. A young failed art student named Adolf Hitler is living in a flophouse, spending his days reading voraciously in public libraries. And what's he reading? Not Mein Kampf, because he hasn't written that yet. He's devouring the works of Austrian occultists, particularly a man named Guido von List and his student Georg Lanz von Liebenfels. According to historian Nicholas Goodrich Clark, these two men created what's called Ariosophy, which roughly translates to wisdom of the Aryans. This wasn't just simple racist pseudoscience. It was a complete cosmology with a creation myth and a religious system that claimed the Aryan race were literally descended from godlike beings who once ruled an advanced civilization. Von List taught that ancient Germanic tribes possessed secret runic wisdom, magical knowledge passed down from Atlantis itself. Now here's where it gets interesting from a historical accuracy standpoint. Von List wasn't entirely making this up from whole cloth. He was taking real Norse and Germanic traditions. The runes were real, the mythology was real, and the ancient tribal structures were real. And then he was twisting them into something completely unrecognizable. The runes, for example, were an actual writing system used by Germanic peoples from around 150 AD onward. But von List transformed them into a magical alphabet where each symbol supposedly contained hidden Aryan power. He created what he called the Armanen runes, claiming that they were the original 18 runes revealed to him in a vision. The problem is that actual historical runology shows the Elder Futhark had 24 runes, and von List's system was pure invention. So there's that. But here's what made this effective. By mixing real history with invented mysticism, von List created something that felt authentic. The real evidence was contaminated by the fantasy. It's a pattern that we see throughout history when people want to legitimize their ideologies. This is what Hitler absorbed in Vienna. This became his worldview, not politics and not economics, religion. The belief that the Aryan race were fallen gods who needed to reclaim their divine heritage through racial purification and the recovery of ancient magical knowledge. Hitler soaks up this Aristotelical worldview in Vienna, but it remains personal belief and individual conviction. The transformation happens after World War I, when he encounters the Thule Society in Munich. This is our second major piece of proof, and this is where we see a religious order create a political party. The Thule Society was founded in 1918 by Rudolf von Sebottendorf. According to historian Michael Fitzgerald's research in Stormtroopers of Satan, this wasn't some book club. This was a secret society modeled on Freemasonic lodges, complete with initiation rituals, degrees of advancement, and a core membership that included some of the most powerful men in Bavaria. The Thule Society took their name from Ultima Thule, a mythical northern land mentioned in ancient Greek and Roman texts. Pytheas, a Greek explorer around 330 BC, described it as a land 6 days north of Britain. Most historians think he meant Norway, Iceland, or possibly the Shetland Islands, So yes, there was a real geographic reference point. But the Thule Society built an entire racial mythology around this ambiguous ancient reference. They claimed Thule wasn't just a legend, it was the original Aryan homeland, possibly located in the Arctic or in Atlantis before it sank. They taught that the Aryan race had originated from this paradise and possessed advanced technology and magical abilities that modern humans had lost. Their members were the spiritual descendants of Thulean priest kings. The Thule Society practiced ritual magic as well. Member accounts describe seances attempting to contact ancient Aryan spirits. They used meditation techniques combined with Germanic symbolism. They also adopted the swastika as their symbol. And here's a critical point. The swastika is an ancient symbol found in cultures worldwide, from Hindu and Buddhist traditions to Native American tribes to ancient Germanic peoples. It typically represented prosperity, good fortune, and the sun. The Thule Society claimed it as an exclusively Aryan symbol and reversed its direction, transforming a universal symbol of life into their emblem of racial supremacy. The Thule Society didn't just talk, they acted. They funded the German Workers' Party, which Hitler joined in 1919. That party became the Nazi Party. Key Thule members like Dietrich Eckart became Hitler's mentors. Rudolf Hess, who would then become Hitler's deputy, was a Thule member as well. The occult society directly created the Nazi Party. This is the crucial transition. Hitler's individual religious beliefs, formed in Vienna, found institutional expression through the Thule Society. What had been one man's occult obsession became the founding ideology of a political movement. Now, why should you care about obscure occult societies from a century ago? Because when you understand that World War II was fundamentally a religious crusade, with millions of German soldiers and SS officers believing that they were holy warriors in a cosmic battle, everything changes. The Holocaust wasn't just hatred or political scapegoating. To the Nazi leadership, it was sacred duty, religious purification commanded by ancient Aryan gods, and cosmic law. When you grasp that they saw themselves as priest warriors restoring a divine order, you understand why rational arguments and evidence had no impact. You simply can't negotiate with someone who believes that they're fulfilling a mandate from the universe itself. This matters today because similar fusions of mysticism, nationalism, and dehumanization still exist. They just use different symbols and different enemies. Understanding the religious foundation of Nazi evil is essential for recognizing when history tries to repeat itself. Alright, let's keep going. So, what exactly did Hitler personally believe? Here's where our proof gets concrete, because we actually have his own words and the testimony of those closest to him. Hitler was simultaneously a true believer and a cynical manipulator. He believed enough to structure policy around these ideas, but was pragmatic enough to suppress public occultism when it became publicly inconvenient. According to Hermann Rauschning's controversial but partially corroborated accounts in Hitler Speaks, Hitler spoke privately about his beliefs in a hidden stream of ancient wisdom that modern science had abandoned. He was obsessed with what he called Weltanschauung, a worldview, and for him, this wasn't a political philosophy, it was a real religious revelation. Hitler believed that ancient civilizations, particularly the pre-Christian Germanic tribes, had possessed what he called racial memory and blood consciousness. The idea that genetic inheritance carried not just physical traits, but spiritual knowledge and abilities. He believed the Aryan race represented the next stage of human evolution, a return to godlike abilities that had been suppressed by Christianity and Jewish influence. Now here's where we separate fact from fiction. Did ancient Germanic peoples have sophisticated spiritual systems? Absolutely. The Norse had complex mythology with 9 realms, a world tree called Yggdrasil, and concepts like word, fate, that showed sophisticated philosophical thinking. They had runic alphabets, oral traditions, and shamanic practices. But did they have magical superpowers or lost Atlantean technology? There is zero evidence of that. Hitler took real cultural achievements, impressive enough on their own, and projected fantasy on them. Real archaeological wonders commonly get twisted into pseudoscientific fantasy when people start with their conclusions and work backwards. Hitler also embraced social Darwinism, but gave it a mystical twist. Where Darwin described natural selection as a blind process, Hitler believed it was a spiritual law of the cosmos, that racial struggle was the mechanism by which humanity would evolve back to its godlike Aryan origins. And he believed in providence, the idea that he was chosen by cosmic forces to fulfill a world historical mission. After surviving numerous assassination attempts, including the July 20th, 1944 bomb plot, where he walked away with minor injuries while others died, he became convinced that he was protected by supernatural forces. This belief in his own messianic destiny was a core component of his occult worldview. The idea that certain individuals could tap into racial memory and become vessels for Aryan destiny. This was his secret religion, and a fusion of corrupted Norse paganism, pseudoscientific racism, and apocalyptic millennialism that promised a thousand-year Reich that would restore humanity to a mythical golden age. Not political ideology with religious flavoring, but religion disguised as politics. If Hitler was the prophet of this twisted religion, then Heinrich Himmler was its high priest. And this is where a proof becomes undeniable, where the Nazi occult obsession went from belief system to bureaucratic reality, with institutional structures, budgets, expeditions, and military doctrine all serving religious goals. Here's what you need to understand. The SS wasn't just an elite military unit. It was a religious order modeled explicitly on the Teutonic Knights and the Knights Templar. Every SS officer was taught that they were part of an unbroken lineage stretching back to ancient Germanic warrior priests that genuinely believed that they were continuing a sacred mission that had been interrupted by Christianity's corruption of pure Aryan spirituality. This wasn't a metaphor. This was their actual operating philosophy. The entire Nazi military hierarchy, especially at the upper echelons, was built on the belief that they were warrior monks serving ancient Aryan gods in a cosmic war for humanity's spiritual evolution. Himmler founded the Ahnenerbe in 1935, literally ancestral heritage, which was officially a research organization but functioned more like an occult think tank with a massive budget and state backing. According to Heather Pringle, the Ahnenerbe sent expeditions across the globe searching for proof of ancient Aryan civilizations. Remember that 1935 Tibet expedition I mentioned at the beginning? Led by Ernst Schaffer, it was ostensibly zoological research, but Himmler's real interest was finding evidence that Tibet had been founded by Nordic Aryans who had migrated south. The team measured skulls, documented supposed Aryan features in Tibetan nobility, and searched for ancient texts that might contain lost Aryan wisdom. They found exactly zero evidence of any Aryan connection to Tibet, because there wasn't any. But that didn't stop Himmler from spinning the expedition as successful anyway. Himmler also transformed Wewelsburg Castle into an SS cult center. He renovated it to serve as a Germanic Camelot, complete with a circular round table for his 12 highest-ranking SS officers, deliberately mirroring Arthurian legend but claiming it was recreating ancient Germanic traditions. In the castle's north tower, he created a room with 12 pedestals arranged in a circle where SS officers would meditate and, according to some accounts, attempt to channel the spirits of dead Germanic warriors. The SS itself was restructured as a religious order. New members underwent initiation rituals involving torchlit ceremonies, oath-taking on artifacts claimed to be ancient Germanic relics, and indoctrination in Aryan spirituality. Himmler tried to replace Christian holidays with neo-pagan festivals celebrating solstices and Germanic gods. He created elaborate marriage and birth ceremonies designed to replace Christian sacraments. SS officers had to prove their racial lineage back to 1750, but this wasn't just about genetics. It was about spiritual inheritance, the belief that Aryan blood carried divine essence and ancestral wisdom. And this wasn't isolated to the SS. Field marshals, generals, and high-ranking Wehrmacht officers were often inducted into these belief systems. Many genuinely saw themselves as modern incarcerations of Teutonic warrior priests. The military campaigns weren't just strategic. They were reclaiming lands that the Nazis believed had been wholly Aryan territory in ancient times. The push into the Soviet Union wasn't just Lebensraum. It was a crusade to reclaim the Eurasian steppes that they believed were the original Aryan homeland. And here's the thing, this wasn't window dressing for the real work. This was the work to Himmler and to the Nazi high command. They really believed that by purifying the Aryan race through genocide and by recovering ancient Aryan magic, that they would transform the SS into a new type of human, a spiritual elite who would rule over a thousand-year empire. The military operations, the territorial expansion, the systematic murder, all of it was religious ritual on a massive scale. The entire Wehrmacht was mobilized in service of what the leadership believed was a divine mandate to cleanse the earth and restore Aryan god kings to their rightful throne. Now, did any of this work? Did they find any real ancient power? No. What they found was that when you give unlimited power to people operating under a delusional religious framework that dehumanizes entire categories of human beings, you get genocide. The occult beliefs didn't just give them permission to commit atrocities. The atrocities were the religion. Mass murder wasn't a means to an end. To true believers like Himmler, it was worship, it was sacrament, and it was the mechanism of cosmic transformation itself. Now again, understanding this is important because it changes the comfortable narrative that the Holocaust was about economic resentment or political scapegoating. World War II was a holy war. The Nazi leadership and large portions of the officer corps believed that they were soldier priests in a cosmic battle that had been prophesied in ancient texts and demanded by Aryan gods. Mass murder wasn't policy, it was liturgy. Conquest wasn't strategy, it was pilgrimage to sacred lands. When you understand that key Nazi leaders and many in the upper military echelons believed genocide was their religious duty commanded by cosmic law, you understand why rational arguments and evidence had no effect. You can't reason someone out of a position that they didn't use reason to get themselves into, especially when that position is religious revelation. This matters today because similar fusions still exist. They just wear different masks and target different enemies. Pattern recognition could potentially save future lives. Now we need to address the uncomfortable question. Was Hitler actually right about anything? And this is where intellectual honesty demands that we separate the kernels of historical truth from the mountains of delusion and evil. Here's what Hitler borrowed from real history. The ancient Germanic peoples did have sophisticated spiritual systems. The Norse had complex mythology, runic alphabets, and shamanic practices. They valued honor, courage, and loyalty. These are real documented traditions. The problem is that Hitler stripped these cultural values of all context and nuance, and then weaponized them into a totalitarian death cult. He took the poetry of the Eddas and turned it into propaganda for genocide. The runes were a real writing system with cultural significance. The Elder Futhark wasn't just an alphabet. Each rune had symbolic meaning and was used in divination practices. What Hitler got wrong was claiming exclusive Aryan ownership and inventing magical properties that have no historical basis. Hitler was also right that ancient civilizations were more advanced than Victorian scholars gave them credit for. And we've covered ancient sites extensively on this channel. Ancient villages predating farming, pre-pyramid civilizations, and massive megalithic structures. Ancient people were doing incredible things. Where Hitler went catastrophically wrong was attributing all civilization to a master Aryan race and ignoring overwhelming evidence of independent development across cultures. Even the Nazi emphasis on physical fitness and the mind-body connection has real science supporting it, as we understand today through neuroscience. The problem was that they took this legitimate insight and twisted it into eugenics and euthanasia of the disabled. So what was for sure complete fiction? Well, racial purity creating superpowers. Modern genetics proves that there's no such thing as racial purity. Humans have been mixing since we left Africa. The most genetically pure populations, as a matter of fact, actually suffer from reduced genetic diversity and increased genetic disorders. The Nazi belief that racial purity would unlock hidden abilities is the opposite of how genetics actually work. What about Aryan origins in Tibet, Atlantis, and the Arctic? All the current genetic evidence shows that modern humans originated in Africa and then migrated outward. Indo-European peoples, who spoke the language ancestral to Germanic languages, likely originated in the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 4000 to 5000 BC, nowhere near Tibet, Atlantis, or the Arctic. We've also covered DNA evidence on this channel, showing how genetic testing is rewriting our understanding of ancient migrations, but it still contradicts every single one of Hitler's theories about racial origins. Then there's the world ice theory. Hitler endorsed Hans Hörbiger's world ice theory, which claimed that the solar system was formed from ice and that moons falling to Earth caused previous advanced civilizations to be destroyed. This is complete pseudoscience and contradicted by everything that we know about astronomy, geology, and physics. Finally, Atlantis as an Aryan homeland. Now this one requires nuance. Plato's account mentions Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules and destroyed in a single day and night. Modern researchers have proposed several legitimate possibilities. Santorini and the Minoan civilization destroyed by volcanic eruption around 1600 BC, the Richat structure in Mauritania, and even locations in the Mediterranean or off the coast of Spain. Some of these theories have geological merit and deserve serious investigation. The problem wasn't that Hitler considered Atlantis might have existed somewhere. The problem was that he invented a completely fictional racial narrative around it, claiming that it was exclusively Aryan and that this justified genocide. Real archaeology suggests advanced Bronze Age civilizations were trading across vast distances and sharing knowledge, but that knowledge exchange happened between diverse peoples, not from one master race that we know of. So here's the fundamental problem. Hitler started with his conclusions, Aryan supremacy, and worked backward, cherry-picking any historical tidbit that seemed to support his worldview while ignoring mountains of contradictory evidence. That's not how historical or scientific investigation actually works. Alright, let's review the proof that I promised you at the beginning and connect it to a broader pattern that we've explored on this channel. The documented evidence first. Hitler's worldview was shaped by occult religious teachings in Vienna before he became political. The Thule Society, a religious order, funded and created the Nazi Party. Nazi leadership believed that they were fighting a cosmic religious war spanning thousands of years. The SS was structured as a religious order with warrior priests, not just soldiers. Military campaigns were crusades to reclaim sacred geography. And the Holocaust was religious ritual and purification to Nazi true believers. This is all documented in their own writings, organizational structures, and testimony. World War II was a religious war, disguised as politics and racial ideology. So how does this connect to what we've covered on the channel before? Well, if you've been watching, you know that this pattern repeats throughout history. We've covered how ancient religions evolved and how people take real ancient traditions and reinterpret them to serve their own agendas. Hitler did the exact same thing with Germanic paganism. He took real Norse spirituality and twisted it into something unrecognizable. We've also done extensive coverage on lost biblical texts and how religious writings get edited, suppressed, and rewritten to serve political agendas. Hitler did the exact same thing with Germanic paganism. He rewrote history, suppressed contradictory evidence, and created a new scripture for his racial religion. This also connects to something that we talk about a lot on this channel, how conspiracy thinking works. Hitler claimed mainstream historians were hiding the truth about Aryan achievements. This gave him permission to ignore actual evidence in favor of his preferred narrative. We've covered archaeological suppression and instances where evidence genuinely gets ignored or hidden. But that doesn't mean that every wild theory is true. The skill is learning to distinguish legitimate skepticism from paranoid delusion. We've covered how humanity responds to existential threats and catastrophes throughout history. The Nazis created an artificial existential threat narrative to justify their actions. That's why understanding actual history versus manufactured history matters. And finally, we know that religious manipulation for power isn't new. We've explored early Christianity, competing religious movements, and how sacred texts get weaponized. It's a pattern that repeats across cultures and time periods. So, what's the final picture? Hitler's secret religion was a syncretic fusion of corrupted Norse paganism, pseudoscientific racism, conspiracy theories about Jewish world domination, and millenarian prophecy about an Aryan thousand-year Reich. It took real elements, Germanic runes, Norse mythology, and Indo-European migrations, and wove them into a cosmic drama where the Nazis were heroes in a spiritual war for humanity's evolution. The most disturbing truth is that this wasn't a bug in the Nazi ideology. It was the entire operating system. The occult framework wasn't an afterthought to the real political program. The politics was the cover for the religious program. What we call World War II, what we understand as territorial expansion and racial genocide, was to Nazi leadership a holy war of cosmic purification. The Holocaust wasn't just genocide. To true believers like Himmler and much of the SS and Wehrmacht officer corps, it was a religious purification ritual preparing humanity for spiritual transformation. The military campaigns were simply crusades to reclaim sacred Aryan lands. Every aspect of Nazi Germany was built to serve this ancient religious mandate, disguised in the language of politics and race only because that's what 20th century audiences would understand. Now, what to take away? First, mixing mysticism with political power is dangerous, especially when that mysticism includes dehumanization of outsiders. Second, intellectual honesty demands that we acknowledge when our enemies got small details right while rejecting their larger framework. And third, understanding the actual belief systems behind historical atrocities, not just sanitized versions, is essential for recognizing similar patterns before they can metastasize. Well, that's it, everybody. As usual, all of my sources are linked in the pinned comment and then in the description below. And I mean what I said in the beginning. Go fact check everything I just told you. I promised you proof that World War II was actually a religious war, and I delivered it with documented sources, historical records, and the Nazis' own words. Now, if you want to see me improve these videos, dig deeper into controversial topics, or tackle subjects that you're just curious about, subscribe to the channel and drop your suggestions in the comments. Hit that like button if you learned something today, and just know the truth doesn't need protection from scrutiny because history isn't about making us comfortable, it's about making us wiser. As always, this has been Arnie's Brain Train. I'm Alex Arnold, and remember, the world isn't always this simple, but it's always this interesting. I'll see you on the next ride. All aboard.